I'm going to discuss the context of my student teaching. I taught the subject of U.S. history from 1865 to present. I taught the Cold War unit and the Civil Rights unit, but my writing assignments, the one I'm going to talk about today, focused on the Cold War unit. My grade level was 7th grade. The ages of my students were 12 to 14. And with all my classes, I had around 70 students. The big factor that really impacted my writing assignments was a socio-economic factor, and I will discuss a little further about that later in my presentation. And I know this may not go in the right place, but I use journals for examples of how students grew with their writing. Again, my content was the Cold War, and I had 3 different journal entries. The first one was about the Red Scare, and it was right in the beginning of the unit. Basically, in this journal entry, I had my students define and discuss what the Red Scare was and what the Hollywood 10 was. And in that journal, they had to pretend to be a part of either the Hollywood 10, the people protesting against or for the Hollywood 10, and discuss and define what the Red Scare was. And also, which was pretty important, was they learned some vocab terms such as red, meaning communist, and this is what this picture shows. The next entry talked about the Korean War. This was kind of like in the middle of the unit. And in this entry, they pretended to be Harry S. Truman, who was the president during the time of the Korean War, and they had to respond back to a letter. It was called the Banner Letter. It was an angry dad whose son died in the Korean War, and they had to justify why the Korean War was fought. And this is what the second journal entry was about. And the last one discussed about the fall of the Berlin Wall, which obviously was the end of this unit, and they had to pretend to be at the actual fall of the Berlin Wall. So they had to kind of explain what side they were on. Were they East Berlin, West Berlin, and use concepts and terms to talk about that event. The standards, such as the NCSS standard and the SOL standards. The first one talked about the theme of culture, so the NCSS one, and that's because the American culture during the Red Scare, such as the fear of communism, the fear of nuclear war, what people acted, the daily lives of an average American. The second one, the Korean War, talked about individual groups and institutions. Say that word for me.
Institutions.
Institutions, thank you. Basically, the institution was the U.S. government, how that affected the average life of an American citizen. You know, Mr. Banner was mad because the U.S. government sent his son over to the Korean War and he died. So it showed how people were affected by that. Lastly, the Berlin Wall Journal talked about time continuing and change. Basically, how the Berlin Wall impacted, the fall of the Berlin Wall impacted the upcoming events in the 1990s and 2000s. And the SOL that each one talked about was SOL 288C. Basically, this talked about the Korean War and also challenges faced in the Cold War, such as the Red Scare and the Berlin Wall. My learning goals for this class was to critically think. If you pretend that you're in that era and you had to use knowledge, you're critically thinking. You're not just defining something. You're not just explaining what that was. You can actually have to pretend that you're there, pretend that you lived in that era. So that's why, and that's what I wanted my students to do, critically think. Also, use information learning class and put that in their paper. So they are paying attention in my class, they understand what they're using, or they understand what they're learning in class, and they're using it in their paper. Also, describing terms and concepts, explain what communism is, explaining what containment is. Identifying people and events, such as knowing who Harry S. Truman was. If you don't know who he was, you cannot complete one of my assignments. And lastly, use evidence as support for their reasoning. So I picked 2 students. Student A was Kayla, and student B was Jake. I'm going to talk about Kayla a little bit. Her background is she was a pretty good student, a really great student. She was kind of shy, kind of quiet, but she was always actively listening. The reason why I picked her was I knew she was actively listening, but I didn't know if she was retaining anything that I was telling or what I was explaining. So that's initially why I picked her. After the first assignment, I found out that her problem was spelling and grammar. So that was the big goal that I wanted to fix. And you see the grammar gorillas, and that was the goal with Kayla. Now Jake was kind of a little different. He was really social in class. He loved to talk, He obviously knew his stuff. He was always raising his hand and wanted to share his thoughts. Problem was with him is that he really didn't follow directions well in class, in assignments, in anything. So my goal, my initial goal, was I wanted Jake to follow directions in my papers. And then after the first paper, I found out he had spelling issues, grammar issues, as well as explaining his whole thought. So those are the initial reasons why I picked these two students. And if you look at this picture, you see a lady sit down next to please do not sit here, and this is what Jake liked to do. So my first journal entry, if you look, was about the Red Scare. And in all my journal entries, I like to include images in the assignment just to get their minds going, a visual piece of evidence. Then I explained what I wanted them to do. I bolded Red Scare and Hollywood 10, explained they had to define those two terms and pretend that they were a part of it. They also had to choose an identity, such as protesters being part of the Hollywood 10, either for or against protesting, or just being there and just watching on TV. So that was the main part of this assignment. This is Kayla's response, and overall she did a great job explaining her thoughts. She did a great job following directions, but she did make some errors in terms of spelling and grammar. And I just pointed that out. I wrote on the bottom, just watch out next time so you can improve on it. I made also physical evidence as well too. Now this is Jake's. If you look at Jake's, he didn't really complete the whole assignment. He kind of stopped halfway. He had some spelling and grammar issues as well. And I also said follow directions because, as I said, you had to identify who you were. He didn't identify who he was. So he missed a major step in this assignment. So this was one scenario of him not following directions. And my findings in Journal 1 is I found the initial problems and expanded what my students needed to work on. Also, I gave basic feedback individually, such as what you saw physically, me writing what they had to work on. Now, I brainstormed ways to make this assignment better, such as instructions. And you're going to see in my next paper how I did that. I wanted to really emphasize what they had to do, and so they could just go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. I thought that would increase their participation as well as the quality of the assignment. And this is me brainstorming. But students understood concepts and terms really well. They really explained what communism was, they understood what a red was, and they understood that the Americans had fear of communism, Soviets, and nuclear war. So they did a great job understanding those terms. So this is Journal 2. This is the Banner letter. This is the actual letter that Mr. Banner wrote to Harry S. Truman. And now if you look, I added bullets explaining exactly what I wanted, such as explaining who you are, and they were Harry S. Truman. So you had to tell me, who is Harry S. Truman? How do you feel about this letter? Why was the Korean War fought? So you had to use information that we learned in class to justify why it was fought, and some other instructions as well too. Now this is Kayla's piece. This was Kayla's best piece of the assignment because she explained her thoughts so well and she followed directions so well. Her grammar improved a lot better. It wasn't perfect, but there was improvement, so I was really happy. But it was just one of the best papers that I read in all my students. I was so proud of her, and she actually really worked at changing the negatives on our first paper. Now Jake, on the other hand, he kind of struggled. If you look, you see the original letter right here, and then you see PS. The reason why he has PS is because I forced him to write more, because he only did like maybe a quarter of the assignment, and then he did half the assignment. So he did do better, but he didn't follow the directions at all. So my goal for him following directions was not achieved here. So I really emphasized right here, you gotta follow directions. I said exactly what he didn't do right. Now on the positive side, his grammar did improve and his spelling did improve. So I was proud of him with that. So going back, mixed results with growth, but overall better instruction produced better work. Overall, as with all my students, they did do a good job and a better job in this assignment. They used evidence to support knowledge, such as why the Korean War was fought, and what happened afterwards. So I was really proud of them with that. And I gave more direct feedback to individual students such as Jake, because I wanted them to improve on their writing. Then I brainstormed ways how to counter homework issues. Basically, my participation for homework completion was pretty bad overall, even with all 3 journals. At number 2, I realized that I had to change something. So I thought of 2 things to do. For the next journal, I actually gave them an example. I did one myself, and I said if I did it, there's no reason why you can't do it. The second thing that I did too was I gave class time for them to finish it. But still, I still had a huge issue with the kids not doing it. And this goes back to the socioeconomic factor. their parents did not value education. They did not respect it. They did not understand the importance of it. So if your parents don't understand it, it's hard for your students to understand it. And for them doing homework, there was no importance for them to do it. So last one, this is Journal 3. This is the Fall of Berlin Wall. I bulleted it again and also gave them an example. Kayla did a good job. She improved her grammar and spelling, which was the big goal, but it was not her best work because she didn't really expand on her thoughts. But again, big goal, she did a good job. This was Jake's best paper. He still kind of struggled with length, but he followed all the directions. So I was really proud of him. I gave him a little smiley face. I said, great job. His spelling was great too. So again, this was his best work. He can still produce better quality of work, but for him, this was the best one. So my findings for this, again, mixed results overall, but with my 2 individual students, they obviously grew in the respective areas that I wanted them to. Because of the changes I made, such as class time and me doing an example, homework completion went up slightly. And again, students tied in concepts and evidence to make statements. So again, these writing assignments showed that they did understand more about the Cold War. So my reflections on this, Kayla and Jake both grew in their areas, which was my big emphasis on this. Kayla's spelling and Jake's following directions. Now next step for their writing, Kayla, since she is quiet in class, I think it's really important for her to expand her thoughts all the time in writing so that the teacher understands that she is understanding. Jake, I think it's just process of him growing up. When he gets to high school, he cannot do this quality of work. The teachers will be a little more strict on him and they have a little higher expectations. But overall, all the students that completed these assignments showed a better understanding of the Cold War because of actually writing down and critically thinking by pretending that they were at these events. Now my big issue was a homework issue. And I tried different ways to counter it, but overall I want to say 10% of all my students did all 3 of the assignments. And this is also giving up makeup time, class time, and really not having a deadline. I accepted all my papers until the end of the Cold War unit. So I gave them about 3-4 weeks to complete these journals. Now, how would I improve, since that was my big issue, was how to combat the homework issue. The only way that I can think of, but still is hard, is to make that assignments or these assignments have a bigger impact on their grade. But still, I think what I would have to do is what I think Mally did, is actually have a class geared towards just writing a journal. Like that would be the class, is that you're going to complete that journal, and then at the end of the class you're going to hand it in. My problem is I was excited about teaching different events and different topics on the Cold War, so I didn't want to have this one class geared towards writing journals. So, but if I had to improve on it, that's what I would do.
Thank you.